Okay, I think I'll get started here. I'm Mike Schachter, president of the Carolina Nature Coalition, and this is an interesting time of year for this presentation. Um, this presentation is coming during election season in North Carolina, and it's very important that we elect people that are going to support the wetlands, right? And also support mitigation of climate change. And so I hope everybody gets out and votes. Uh, Today we have an interesting topic. We have the White Oak Riverkeeper, Riley Lewis, and I'm going to let Tom Shoup do the introduction. Tom Shoup is our secretary to the Carolina Nature Coalition and also our technical guru. So I hope when he's up here, nothing goes wrong.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Shoup, as Michael said. But I wanted to say, when it came up, this time of year, I thought, what would I kind of like to have, as a topic? And I remembered that last year, the EPA removed federal protection for a majority of the country's wetlands. It was about this time, I think it was August of last year, that they had to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court. And, basically they narrowed the scope of the Clean Water Act. That's how it happened. But anyway, today, Riley Lewis is here with us, and she is the proud White Oak Waterkeeper with Coastal Carolina Riverwatch as of September 2022, right? Yep, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, right here. Through her work, she monitors waters for pollution, conducts outreach to community members, that's us, and advocates for water quality along North Carolina's Crystal Coast. Riley is a Maryland native that has spent most of her life in the Carolinas. She received her Bachelor's of Science at Marine Science from University of South Carolina and her master's in coastal and ocean policy from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. After a term as a AmeriCorps member in Wilmington, she moved up to the coast and expanded her understanding and protection of water quality. Her studies and research focus on water pollutants and their impact on local communities because she believes everyone deserves access to clean swimming, fishing, and drinking water. I'd like to introduce Riley Lewis.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So before I get started, let me plug my computer in so it doesn't die. There we go. So based off of who's in the room, who, as far as like ecologically, like with wetlands, how much do y'all know? Who knows like a little bit? Who knows like maybe a little more than a little bit? Who knows like kind of a lot about wetlands? Okay, cool. Policy-wise, who knows a little bit? He mentioned the legislative change. Know a little bit? Know a medium? Know a lot. Okay, cool. I want to make sure I'm gauging the presentation accordingly because I can talk in detail for days. All right, y'all. Well, let me start a timer because I have to do that because I tend to talk for a long time. So we're go. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for having me again. Like the introduction showed, that my name is Riley Lewis. My title is White Oak Waterkeeper, and I am with Coastal Carolina Riverwatch. Our main mission is to protect the quality of water and quality of life in coastal North Carolina. So This is the White Oak River Basin, by definition of the Department of Environmental Quality in North Carolina. These are 4 distinct rivers. So we've got I don't know if you can see my mouse. Oh, you guys can't see it up there. Oh, now you can see it up there. We got the New River, the White Oak, the Newport, and the North. And y'all are a little up here. And so this is ultimately 4 small coastal rivers that all kind of do their own thing, but are interconnected by our intricate sound system and inlet system that connect us to the ocean. So DEQ kind of just mushed all of these together and said, we're just going to connect these all as a basin. So that's what I do, and what makes it really fun, because this environment is predominantly salty water or brackish water. I have a little bit of fresh waters, but then I have a lot of different people who interact in this space. We got military, we have residents, we have a lot of visitors. We have a whole bunch of different income levels. We have a whole bunch of different types of work. So I deal a lot with fishers. And so it's a really dynamic place to live and work. And I actually live in Morehead City. So I'm over here by Beaufort, and I absolutely love it. I keep moving to smaller towns, and I keep loving it that much more. So you're going to find me in the middle of nowhere next. Y'all have talked to Heather Deck at Sound Rivers to give some context to the work that we do. A lot of my work is possible because of collaboration. And so this just shows you one of the many collaborators that I really rely on with the work that I do. I am a waterkeeper, so I am licensed under Waterkeeper Alliance, which is a global nonprofit that gives out these waterkeeper titles to folks who cover basins of water. And so this is a global nonprofit. So I have met waterkeepers from China, from Senegal, from South Africa, all over the world. And there's a lot in the United States. And North Carolina is actually one of the highest densities. And there are 15 of us that work in and around the North Carolina space. So you can kind of see all of these different basins. These 2 are mine. So this is the White Oak River Basin. And then Sound Rivers covers the Neuse River and the Tar Pamlico. So they're my neighbors. I'm kind of squished between the Cape Fear and the Neuse. But we are all 15 of the keepers in North Carolina, all really work together to do Waterkeepers Carolina, which is a congregation of all of us working together to do statewide policy work and then also statewide research. So that kind of brings into what we do at Coastal Carolina Riverwatch. I am very much boots on the ground. I need to be in the communities, on the field, doing research, sometimes doing some emergency monitoring, doing advocacy work and outreach. So our research spans from anything from looking at maybe like Gen X PFAS in oysters, all the way to working with underserved communities to provide flood resiliency resources and try and promote water quality and quality of life on that front. So really spreads the gambit. But everything that we do is based out of communities. So a community member at some point has come to us and said, I'm concerned about this. And we hear it enough that we're like, let's find grant funding, let's start a project, and let's provide some resources and fill a gap of service. And then everything that we do has to incorporate outreach and advocacy. We think it is important to the work that we do that whatever research or data we have, we are able to share it with the public, because if we're not able to share it, utilize that knowledge, it stays in a silo and it's not helpful. So that really is, again, boots on the ground, which is why I'm here, which I appreciate. So I am going to jump into wetlands. Before I do that, does anyone want to guess what the definition of wetlands are? It's in the name. They're lands that are wet. I'm not kidding. That's just kind of what it is. So wetlands, the ecological definition, what scientists look at and define as a wetland, is a place in which a land is covered by water. This can be salt, fresh, somewhere in between, and is either wet seasonally or permanently. It'll function as its own distinct ecosystem, so it's not a part of a larger ecosystem. And you can recognize a wetland from other types of land or bodies of water, predominantly by the vegetation, because it's specifically adapted to hold soil, or sorry, to hold wet soil, and the vegetation is very used to that. So what we're seeing is that wetlands were created naturally because water was accumulating in places. So if there's a bunch of hills, the lowest part is naturally going to collect that water, and the vegetation is going to slowly adapt to be able to handle that. So it's really, really good at holding on to water and then utilizing it. So here is a rough little diagram, a lot going on. Let me give you a tour. So what we see is like a basic river system. So everyone's fairly familiar with rivers. We start getting into these dashed lines, which are like your streams, your intermittent and ephemeral streams, which are just fancy words for saying they're there sometimes and they're not some of the times. That means that they're just like based off of rainfall, they're going to be full of water or not. We also have like the floodplain. So this is areas that are naturally going to fill up with water whenever there's an increased amount of precipitation. That's what floodplains are supposed to do. Very important. River systems naturally have them, and the vegetation there can normally show it. Then we start getting into floodplain wetlands. These are wetlands that are like always wet. They're very integrated with the river system, and you can normally see either visual connections. Salt marshes are a good example of that. And then we have these isolated wetlands. So these are wetlands that can either be fed by rainwater or groundwater. So groundwater seeping up from the earth happens in places, and that is just as enough of a reason to cause wetlands or create wetlands as rain would. And so as you can see, there's a lot of obvious superficial connections with wetlands and other bodies of water. But the one that we don't often see is this groundwater connection, where the ground has a base level of water on it. And if you dig down deep enough, that's what wells are. You're going to get water coming up. So they're more connected than we think they are beyond visually. This will be important later. And so why are wetlands important? This is obvious to some, even more obvious to me, but sometimes it's really beautiful to just break into like what really makes a wetland so beneficial to our communities and to our environment. So wetlands are actually fantastic water filters. So they have between this soils that are in wetlands and the vegetation, they're really good at actually collecting and breaking down pollutants. It's used naturally like on the base for breaking down some toxic chemicals. So I'm not saying it can heal all of our problems, but it's naturally pretty good at slowing down that water and breaking it down a little bit. And that's keeping it from going downstream and impacting drinking waters, recreational waters, and fishing waters. Wetlands are incredibly important for fish and wildlife species. Wetlands are home to 40% of the world's species and nearly 7,000 species of plants in the United States. They provide homes for 75% of commercially harvested fish and shellfish species. So you got to think wetlands include your salt marshes. They include all of those little Carolina bays that are over in the Croatan. And so these are incredibly diverse and incredibly rich environments that are really like a home base for a lot of creatures, because birds will migrate through, they'll nest there. There's a lot of fish that will use it as nursery areas, a lot of insects. So really, really dense. There's also the really good benefit of carbon sequestration. So fancy word of it's really good at just taking up and using carbon, so CO2. They're one of the most efficient ecosystems at storing this carbon, partially because of all of that vegetation, all of those soils. They're all using up this carbon. But there is a little double-edged sword to that, because that means when wetlands are destroyed, they actually release a lot of carbon into the atmosphere because they're holding on to it for so long. When you destroy it, you're putting all that carbon somewhere else, which is going to be in the atmosphere. And the two that I think are kind of most important on a day-to-day basis, because we kind of see this the most often, it's the most visual aspect, is the flood reduction. So wetlands, when I'm always teaching students, I'm saying wetlands are sponges because water is supposed to go there. So it's really good at holding on to it. They can absorb as much as 1.5 million gallons of floodwater per acre. And you can probably imagine how good that is for communities living next to wetlands, because instead of that water sitting on a road, sitting on a grass field, it's being taken up, stored, and ultimately absorbed by the vegetation. So not only is the vegetation, this is going into the groundwater recharge, not only is that vegetation soaking up some of that water, the roots actually funnel it into groundwater. So that's why it's really, really good at holding onto that water and then getting rid of it, because it's a natural groundwater recharge place. And so we're actually seeing that a lot of our aquifers are drying up. I'm not saying that's exclusively wetlands, but I'm saying that wetlands might help a little bit. And so this is a lot of really good benefits that come from wetlands that nature has just given us. This is nature's way of dealing with excessive amounts of water, and it's really good at it. So when we're looking at the status of wetlands, you can kind of see in this image, the green is where wetlands are going to be the most predominant. And something that I really think is fascinating is the comparison of freshwater to saltwater wetlands, because on the coast, you see wetlands all over the place. You see your salt marshes, but that's the most visual because it's kind of, it's not blocked by like large trees because the vegetation is fairly low. But a lot of the forests we have around us are actually wetland forests. So they're actually doing more than just providing the trees that you see. There's a lot of different wetlands in our area, and a lot of them are freshwater. And so you can see how they really congregate around the coast, especially the southeast. This is partially because a lot of the development has removed wetlands in the northeast. But at this point, this is where a lot of them reside, which is actually really beneficial to those of us who are living in this area, because those wetlands are still around and they're still really working. And so this is what I'm going to start getting into. Wait, I probably had some comments on this. Let me pull those up. Nope, don't. There you go. All right, so I'm going to start delving into some regulatory stuff. Anyone have any questions about what wetlands are ecologically? Fun facts.
You still have 1 acre per person field allowance in the state?
Oh, I don't know. What is that in reference to?
One person being given an allowance to field.
Uh-huh.
1 acre for their own.
I don't know that ratio. I think I don't tend to deal with things on a small scale, like on the personal level, because I tend to deal with a lot of developments. Yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna pick your brain about that later. So going into the regulatory stuff. All right, so I have two different maps here. The one on the left is Rapanos. This is what we were previously, before the most recent changes, running as the regulatory definition of wetlands. Note that this is not the ecological definition of wetlands. We have decided to define them differently for the sake of being able to still utilize the resources, aka filling them. And so on the left, you can kind of see this is what is considered waters of the United States. So I'm calling, that's what WOTUS is. Waters of the United States are waters that the federal government states as being protected by the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act was enacted in what, 1972, 71, 72, early 70s. And those are waters that can be protected from filling, from dredging, from polluting, and are more easily regulatorily protected. And so what we're seeing are rivers. those are really hopefully going to never be removed from the Clean Water Act. We also have water or wetlands, like these little bubbles, that are considered jurisdictional. So that means that they're considered jurisdictions for waters of the United States. So we have the floodplain, we have some of these ditches, we have a good bit of wetlands. And then the big difference here is going to be this case by case basis. So they were willing that if someone wanted to build, people have to go out and assess the lands to see if there are wetlands that are quote unquote jurisdictional. And at this point, wetlands were considered jurisdictional if there was a surface water connection, there was a sufficient groundwater connection, and an ecological connection to the surrounding area. So you could make cases for each of these different types of water bodies based off of how they were contributing to the environment. In the Sackett case, which is the EPA versus Sackett Supreme Court case, this changed a lot. So this was the Sacketts wanted to develop on a lake. And what they ended up doing, there was a big wetland by their property that they wanted to develop. There was a large road with culverts underneath that was connected to a large lake. And so they wanted to build on it, so they just started filling it. And Army Corps of Engineers said, whoa, that is a water of the United States, you cannot do that. And they said, I'm going to take you to court about it. And what the courts ended up deciding is that the Sacketts were correct, and that even though the road was put in afterwards, and there's still that engineering connection, that is grounds for cutting off that wetland, and it is no longer protected. So that means it can be filled, it can be polluted, and it can be used however we want without special permits. So that opened up, obviously, a very, very large amount of wetlands that are now deemed free for people to develop on. And so the time frame for it was in, yeah, it was 2020. And then I think as of this year, Army Corps of Engineers is still trying to decide what actually the definition is. So still semi getting into practice. This is why we're panicking and we're trying to create change and revert back before we make too much committed change. So this is what this map is on the right. And so what you can see is all of the stuff that was light gray before, or dark gray, are now light gray. So they will never be considered jurisdictional. There's really not much of a conversation about case by case, if there's groundwater fed, if there's ecological importance, they're just not considered. And so, yes, they're not protected. They're just not protected. Oh, I'm sorry.
On the Zoom. I'll come around with the mic. Oh, okay. So please raise your hand.
And I'll do my best to repeat the question if it does not make it there. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. And so yes, so that's going to be this main difference. And this isn't necessarily new. The definition of wetlands have changed a lot throughout the years. The wetlands tend to be the first to be considered jurisdictional, not protected, not protected, based off of kind of who's running the courts and who's running things. So now that we know that all of these wetlands are now unprotected, we need to see what is threatening them and what could come from, or what could be their demise. And so the top one that I see is development. The intentional clearing and filling or altering or damming of waters, making them separate from navigable waters or waters of the United States or waters protected by the Clean Water Act, all the same. And so I have an advocacy working group where I host regular meetings with just community members who want to bring concerns to me, and then we talk about it as a big group, because most of the time another community member has dealt with the same sort of development. So we can share resources, share strategies, and try to stop developments or at least promote sustainable ones. Regardless, there's always going to be some level of filling that's involved. And I will note, under the Clean Water Act, you're still allowed to fill wetlands. It's just you can't fill as much of them. So it's not stopping it, but it's keeping it in mind. Stormwater. So that's all that runoff, that's all that water that builds up or moves around the surface after rains. And with it, when it drains out, brings all of the chemicals, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the dog poop, all with it and into waterways. If you think about how ecologically important these environments are, sure, they can kind of take up a little bit of these pollutants, but if you're blasting it with toxic chemical after toxic chemical, bacteria after bacteria, it's going to start degrading the quality of that wetland and that ecological area. We're also going to see invasive species. So if you're weakening the plants and animals that are there, that is an opportunity for other species like non-native plants to come in. And that doesn't mean that they're always bad, but most of the time they're not doing the same function as the vegetation was before. So say there was a really good grass that was really good at putting water in the soil. Now maybe there's another grass that comes in and it's not as good as putting water in the groundwater. So you're losing some of the benefit of that wetland because another species is coming in. And I know this is getting kind of technical, but there's a lot to think about, and I kind of want to prove that. We're also going to get into like the water network. So I showed you that groundwater connection. If you take away one, you're suddenly creating a lot of water issues because water still wants to pop up places. And so you're going to have problems with water wanting to show up other areas where you have now removed where the water was originally. And then the larger scope of like sea level rise, coastal acidification, all these things that are bringing more water on the land, and we have less places to put it now because there are less wetlands. So as a result of Sackett versus EPA, up to 90 million acres of wetlands in the US might now be at risk, despite the strong bipartisan support that was outside of the courts for this protection. All right, so big graph, don't worry about it too much, I'll describe it. So the trends in health and abundance of our wetlands. You could already see based off of that map with all the green on it that there's not a lot of spaces that naturally have wetlands to start with. And we've already seen that like the Northeast is kind of run out of room for wetlands. But the wetlands are disappearing 3 times faster than forests currently. And so this is scary because we hear about deforestation all the time. And there was an interagency working group that identified that the Cape Fear, so that basin that's kind of to the left of us at this point, or the west of us at this point, is some of the experiencing some of the highest rate of wetland loss in the nation. So we're at a really scary point. North Carolina wetlands are really, really important, but they're going really, really fast. This is a report, and I'm happy to share the slides with y'all afterwards because there's a whole bunch of resources within them that you can guys deep dive into. But within this report, they did an assessment of wetlands in 2009 and 2019, and they found that 50% increase in wetland loss. So we're seeing a lot of wetland loss, and this is before Sackett. So you can only imagine what can happen post-Sackett. And the largest driver was the increase in like forested plantations, increases in upland agriculture, urban and rural development, and then the creation of lakes. So like the lakes can't really hold that sort of wetland vegetation anymore. So it's actually going to kind of reduce wetlands. It's kind of a funny way to think about it. But ultimately what you're seeing in this graph to the right is the light blue is your gain in that specific type of wetland. And then the light brown is your loss. And then the really skinny dark parts are that net. So this is actually net gained in wetlands. This has not, and the rest have net loss. I can't remember why the upland area made sense to me earlier, but it did. It's been a long day. But what we're seeing is there is a major loss, and this upland gain is probably from some of that like flooding area. You're going to see more of these areas that need to hold water, and they're going to keep popping up. And you're going to have some of these lake areas that are popping up, destroying wetlands, but they kind of have some wetlands that end up popping up around it. So there's a lot of hydrology, groundwater at play that we're not really able to see, visualize, think about. All right. Sorry, I promise I'll wrap up soon. So this is a really good slide. So this kind of shows you where we're at as a nation as far as wetlands protections. So the federal government decided to take away some of the protections for wetlands, but states have the right to have stronger definitions that end up protecting more wetlands. So what we're seeing is all of this light blue are taking the federal definition. The dark blue are states that have stronger definitions that can stay the same regardless of the federal definition, because they've made it as a state. They're like, no, we want to keep that case by case basis. They can do that. This in between, this like kind of medium blue, are areas or states that don't have state protection, but they've done initiatives to protect wetlands. What is the most frustrating is North Carolina is this medium blue. We used to be the dark blue. As of the Farm Bill, which was that 2020? I would say 2022, 2023. The state of North Carolina decided that, you know what, we're going to take the federal definition. And so we scratched our stronger definition for the sake of easier regulation and promoting development. It was lumped under the Farm Act because it was promoted as agricultural benefits and miscellaneous water issues. It's a guise because agriculture is already exempt from a lot of things. So they didn't need exemption from Clean Water Act wetland filling because they're agriculture in North Carolina. So we scratched that. But the reason we're medium blue is because Governor Josh Stein decided that he's going to make an executive order that we need to protect our wetlands. So that is currently what we're working on. We have a loose initiative to protect wetlands, but it doesn't replace the fact that we had stronger regulations as of a year ago, and we do not anymore. And so this is a big effort on the part of waterkeepers. I work with a lot of pro bono lawyers that are doing a lot of wetlands research right now, and we're really trying to create a case for us to flop this, to really revert back to the old definition we had last year, so that before this federal definition that's still loosey-goosey, that we're still trying to figure out how to enforce, gets to commonplace, and we kind of commit ourselves to a lot of wetland loss. Yes.
Is that change legislation?
Yeah, so it was a bill passed through the House and the Senate. Yeah. And so it was passed on both fronts, and they ended up vetoing Stein's or overriding the veto that he placed. So he did not want the bill to include that wetland thing, but they overrode him because we have a supermajority. So that's what happened. Sorry, yes, sorry, Cooper. Wait. I know. Yeah, Governor Cooper. Sorry, man. It's like you said, it's election season. All right. So, with that, I'm going to kind of just give an overview of kind of what we can do. This will be quick. So with wetlands, enforcement of wetlands, In order for someone to fill a wetland that is considered a water of the United States, you need to get a permit from Army Corps of Engineers, which is a federal agency, North Carolina Department of Coastal Management, which does a couple of specific types of projects, specifically on coastal counties, Division of Water Resources, which similar does like research and then like oversees some of like the wetland.orgs and wetland resources. And then the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, and they do a lot of permitting as well. So these are all the entities that have the opportunity to go visit a site, help with the what's called a delineation, which is pretty much just visiting the site and being like, oh, this is a wetland because of XYZ, which that XYZ is now a little reduced, but there's a lot of different elements to approach the permitting process, which is where I encourage y'all to be involved. So ways to be involved. Draft language and writing to legislators. I have a petition right here from Southern Environmental Law Center where you can sign and send it to your local House and Senate representatives and tell them we care about wetlands. So this is very easy. They wrote the language for you. You just place where you live and you get to send it off. Similarly, just like speaking about wetlands to any sort of legislators that you end up running into. Never say it enough. Something we can do as individuals, it's maybe difficult, but there's a lot of resources out there where you can start conserving land on your property. You can get conservation easements. If you're close to water bodies, that's even easier to do. There's land trust. There's land and water fund. There's a lot of different ways where you can request money for protecting lands. So this is something that anyone can do. Just takes a little grit. And then you can promote wetland friendly developments and talk about them at your town local communities. At my advocacy working group that I mentioned, we do provide resources to help you attend your local town meeting, your commissioner, the Board of Commissioners development hearings. So if someone is coming up, hey, I want to create this development, I want it zoned this way, I want this sort of practices on it, you can come up and say, I'm prepared to speak. This is not good for XYZ. I have my personal feelings. I live in the area. It's really bad for my home. It's really bad for my community. And you can work to try and fight for better protections and better developments in your area. It's going to be incredibly hard to stop developments, but we can do our best to at least try and make them as nice as possible. So I leave you with this. It's not hopeless. We have the power. And I am happy to take questions. I also have all those resources and a bunch of mappers and stuff, so I'll send that out to y'all. But I'm happy to take questions now.
Are there local laws that protect the waters, like county laws and city laws?
Yes, so you can have local ordinances that require, I don't know if they can be stronger on the local level, because what are we? We're not a Dillon's rule, we're a house rule, I think. We're in between, I think. But it's kind of case by case where the local government can't have stronger definitions. But I know like the town of North Topsail will fine you like $10,000 a day for filling in a wetland. So you can put a monetary value on there, but as far as like making regulation a little bit stronger, it might be a little more difficult. Not saying you probably can't, but there's some creative options out there.
Is this on? When I see all the different slides and the bullet points, and then you mentioned that you can't stop development, why can't you? Why can't we recognize the hominid species as an invasive species and limit the growth in an area to that area's capacity? And then in a broader sense, do what China did long ago and limit reproduction. Why isn't that looked at as a root cause for dealing with the chaos that is a common denominator amongst everything you've shown?
Well, I stick to water quality, so I'll stick to answering on that front. But yes, I didn't mean to sound pessimistic. You can always fight developments. It takes a long strategic game based off of what I found. Most of the time, our local governments in the state right now have little dollar signs over their eyes from developers. They're really only seeing that as a huge monetary benefit, and they're not really taking in their natural resources. Fully agree. I think wetlands are, or like even just water quality in general, should be way more prioritized because that's literally what humans need to drink, eat, survive on this planet. So it's kind of silly to put development and structures over the quality of the environment that keeps us safe and provides all these resources. One of the arguments that I try to bring up to folks to prioritize is that wetlands are the cheapest alternative to all of the engineering you'll need to do in order to do the same things as wetlands. So they are for free, providing flood mitigation, habitat, a food source, and clean drinking water. In order for you to get all of those things in a man-made environment, you have to build a wastewater treatment plant. You have to build stormwater retention facilities. You have to, create a false environment for your fish species. And you have to over-engineer the environment that you have engineered to do exactly what nature is doing for free. So if you think about that sort of monetary sense, there's plenty of leverage. Right now, it's kind of screaming at deaf ears, and it's very frustrating, but the more people who talk up, the more people who start bugging people, it's going to be a little bit easier. But right now, I'm just trying to provide the resources for people to make local changes in their local communities, to be able to fight for local developments. Developers have really, really strong lobbyists right now at the state, and they are getting away with a lot. I think the state might realize that they might have given them too much the last legislative session. So hopefully they'll reel it back a little bit, but they've cut down on buffers that have to be next to rivers. They've cut down on like density, so you can pack in more homes, and it's a bad situation. So I didn't mean to say we can't, but it's definitely a very uphill battle. But I'm here to provide the resources to help you all fight them.
We have a question online here.
Yes.
Okay, this is from, it looks like either Danny L. It was my understanding prior to the new EPA laws, at least, that in North Carolina, people filling in wetlands were required to pay to a fund that to be used to create new wetlands. My detailed understanding may be a little bit off, but I read this in the general statutes when researching reactions, read the actions of a neighbor. Is this still correct? And what were the details of this?
Yeah, that's actually a great thing to bring up. And I definitely had it in my notes somewhere, but I forgot to say it. So there is such thing as a wetland mitigation bank. So whenever you fill wetlands that are under the Clean Water Act that are jurisdictional, you're technically supposed to make it up in some sort of mitigation effort. If you think about how long the thousands of millions of years it took to build our wetlands, you trying to create a wetland somewhere else is not going to be nearly as beneficial as keeping the current wetland would be. And it just makes sense that that would happen. So like that's ultimate. So yes, that regulation is still in place. I don't know how often it's enforced and how you can pay out of actually doing the vegetation planting and creating a wetland as you can just like going towards a bank somewhere. But in theory, that's great. Remove a wetland, create a wetland, but you're not creating the same quality of wetland. It's kind of as simple as that.
Another question, Kate, is to the Carolina Nature Coalition, really. Would you please make your links clickable so that this person, Ron, could use them? When these are sent to the Carolina Nature Coalition, we will have them in our blog, and they will be clickable.
Yes, and they are clickable here, so we can open up any of these if you want to. You said demonstrate? There you go. All right, I think there was a question out here as well. Yeah, please, at your leisure.
It's been a long day.
I'm still kicking myself that I said Stein instead of Cooper. I don't know where I'm at, guys. I'm sorry. I promise the rest of what I said is true.
I'm pretty rusty about some things. The geographic area for the Coastal Carolina Riverwatch.
Mhm.
Tell me how that relates to the Pamlico Sound area or further north. Are there three different or several groups and is there a common denominator or what?
Yeah, absolutely. So, apologies if this is too foundational. Basins are created because of any sort of drops of water within a certain area are going to funnel into the same river. So for the sake of like this basin, this is all kind of funky wonky over here. But ultimately, if a drop of water falls anywhere within this boundary, it's going to end up flowing into the new river. And similarly for these other river systems. So when you get to the Tar-Pamlico area, Albemarle area, that is a completely separate system as well as the Noose system. So this is designated in two different pieces, but like that's for the sake of people managing a space. Although it is the same keeper now. Sam is wonderful. Yeah, same keeper is covering both of these two different yellow areas. So she's under Sound Rivers. So Heather that came and talked. Mm-hmm. And so my connection is that they're my neighbors. We do a lot of work within Coastal Carolina Riverwatch around fisheries. Fish don't care about boundaries, so I work with my fellow keepers on the coast to do fisheries work. But I try not to do too much like research data collection. I'll do some outreach in the other places, hence I'm here. So but they're a separate system. I have a waterkeeper doing exactly what I do within my basin, just like covering their specific needs of their basin. Does that make sense? Did I answer? Okay, cool.
Since you talk about fisheries, what do you think of the status of the North Carolina fishery?
That's a complex question. We actually just wrapped up 2 weeks ago our Water Quality for Fisheries Symposium. So this will be a regular symposium that we hold each year where we have researchers, representatives, community members that all are doing work around commercial recreation and subsistence fishers. And so with that in mind, we try really, really hard to engage all sides of the fishing community. I'm not going to talk about catch limits. I'm not going to talk about quotas. I'm not going to talk about the gear you use. I'm going to talk about water quality and we'll make sure you can fish and quabble about the whatever issues you're facing as far as fishing. And so a couple years ago, Coastal Carolina Riverwatch did a survey with fishermen along the coast. So if you fished in coastal North Carolina, we wanted to hear from you. And ultimately ask them questions about like, what do you tend to catch? What issues are you seeing? What do you prioritize as water quality concerns? And based off of this large study of coastal North Carolina, we identified the top 5 water quality priorities for people who fish along the coast. And those include animal agriculture and factory farming, wastewater, so like municipal and septic systems, stormwater specifically from roads and parking lots, plastic debris, and emerging contaminants like PFAS or like the Gen X, if you guys are familiar with those. But any sort of those like man-made chemicals that are being increasingly found in our environment. So based off of fishermen, those are priorities as far as water quality. And so we use that to kind of prioritize our work. What I'm seeing with each of those issues, agriculture is shifting. So there used to be a lot of hog farms in North Carolina. There still are, but now there's a whole lot of chicken that is moving in, or turkey, poultry in general. And so we're going to see a shift of water pollutants going from the system that hogs use, which is like wet waste, like poo in a lagoon, to like dry litter systems, and it's spread onto fields similarly to the other waste. Parking lots, roads, that's going to be incredibly difficult to stop pollution wise, but we're doing some research right now to see if like we're seeing tire chemicals in a lot of the waters. We're still preliminary with this, so we don't have a lot of results, but 6-PPD is a chemical that we're finding all over the place, which is known to kill salmon. And so that's a preservative found in tires. So as you can imagine, the amount of times we have to replace our tires, there's a lot of tire rubber and chemicals that are just, especially in our coastal areas where our roads go directly over our rivers, just all over the waters. With PFAS and emerging contaminants, that is rearing its nasty head right now. The more we find out, do we know about PFAS? Yes, does anyone not? A little bit? Class of chemicals that's used in nonstick and waterproofing. So that's your Teflon pans, that's your waterproof jackets, your firefighting foams, all multiple tied to chronic health concerns around cancer, liver disease, heart disease, all of that stuff.
Also known as Forever Chem.
Also known as forever chemicals. Thank you. But yeah, so this is one that like, it started out with just 1 or 2 compounds in this chemical class, and now we have about 300 that we know of. And if you think about that on a regulatory sense, the Environmental Protection Agency can't just say everything under this class is now deemed toxic and you have to only pollute it in this certain amount. You have to go one by one to be able to regulate it. So right now on the federal level in the state of North Carolina, we have 8. And 3 meet in groundwater. So it's a start, but these chemicals, we're finding it everywhere. And not to spiral, but all of us have PFAS in our blood at this point. It's used in food packaging, it's used in our environment. It's very handy, it keeps things waterproof, but now we're realizing maybe things that are waterproof aren't good for the human body. So that is kind of a roundabout way to saying there's a lot of concerns as far as contamination and water quality that's leading to issues with fisheries. And specifically what we're seeing with like blue crabs, with oysters, with shrimp, a lot of that habitat is disappearing too, partially because of water quality and then partially because of on-land development that's creating unsuitable habitat for their homes ultimately. So that's kind of what we're seeing. We're doing a lot of efforts to restore some fisheries, but it's difficult.
PFAS or whatever.
Mhm.
I remember something about Cape Fear River in that regard, and which made me want to ask, is the Cape Fear River Waterkeeper group totally separate from your group, the northeastern part, or are they part of it, all of it now or not?
Yeah, so Cape Fear River Basin, the Cape Fear River Keeper is Cape Fear Riverwatch, and his name is Kemp. He's wonderful. So all of us in the Sound Rivers, which is the 2 basins, myself, and then Kemp at the Cape Fear, we're all separate 501c3s. So we're our own organizations. We just choose to collaborate a lot because if we're going to work on similar environments and on the state level, it's easier to have. Sometimes I feel very privileged to be on the coast because I have my tiny little rivers and I can kind of point to whoever's doing the problem and I'm like, I know it's you. But yeah, so it's Cape Fear is dealing with a lot of chemical contamination right now, whereas like the Noose is dealing with a lot of sediment contamination. So it kind of, this is what's beneficial about having keepers in each of these basins, because we're not all dealing with the same things, and we're able to work on exclusively what is impacting this specific water body. So that's what the privilege of this is. But yeah, if you have any questions about this, or want to find, if you know someone who lives in another area, if you want to know who their river keeper is, you can go to Waterkeepers Carolina, and there's like a little map and bios about all of us. Okay.
Hard data.
Mhm.
What hard data do you have to argue your cases with the state? And I mean, I see a lot up here that's talk I hear from the Neuse River Foundation for 40 years. What hard analytical information do you have to argue and make your case with politicians to affect change?
On the front of wetlands, a lot of data. On the front of water quality and the state, oftentimes they have data that you can use against them. Right now I'm seeing, if I was going to bring data to a legislator, I would try and have data from the state or data that I collected myself. I make sure within Waterkeeper Alliance and Waterkeeper Carolina, we have quality standards that we meet to meet state standards so that our data can be defensible. So what we do is when we go through and we collect data, water quality monitoring, whatever it is, we make sure that we can bring it to the state and be like, this is of concern. All right, so we just completed a study on DNA and bacteria for Enterococcus and E. coli, phosphorus, nitrogen, and ammonia coming out of the upper New River. So those were year-long studies where I sampled every month, plus additional rain events to see where DNA and bacteria was coming from on the land. So we saw a lot of human DNA, some hog DNA, so that I can go to the state now and be like, hi, I'm seeing, I can pinpoint this source of bacterial pollution to these different sources. That is an open door, because no matter how much data you bring to them, they don't necessarily listen to it. So take that with a grain of salt. But we have that data. We have statewide, a lot of bacteria sedimentation data, a lot of habitat data around seagrass beds, oyster beds. A lot of data is out there. A lot of data is out there between scientific articles, university studies, and the state, and then organizations. The hardest part is making sure that I find the academic studies, because they tend to live in silos. So I work a lot with universities to try and make sure that whatever data we collect through their state-approved methods is then shared with the public and legislators. So that's where that outreach advocacy portion of our work is really, really important, because there's a lot of data out there. There is a lot of data. My computer can't hold most of the data sets that I try to pull from the state and the federal sources. But it doesn't matter how much data I bring if there aren't community members to join me and say, here's the hard data. Here's the analytical or the narrative reason for caring about this. So if you have specific data that you would like in mind, I'm happy to connect you with that. But I don't think we have time for me to name out all the data that I have.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely. And yeah, feel free to email me or visit our website. We have a lot of the projects hosted there, but.
Right, and thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
That the Carolina Nature Coalition has a blog, and this information, including the links, will be on the blog with the video when we get it all together. If you like what we do, the Carolina Nature Coalition lives on donations only. There is a donation bottle over there and also online. If you go to Carolina Nature Coalition .org, there is a donation button on the webpage. So thank you all for coming. Next time, we're trying to get a film called Family Tree, which is about a Black family that it's a award-winning documentary about a Black family that is using their tree plantation. They're trying to grow trees to part of to generate generational wealth. We're seeing if we can get this film next time. So stay tuned. If we do, we will send it all out to you since you all are on our email list. So thank you all and have a good evening.